All right, welcome back. We are diving into macroeconomics and we are looking at what makes up or how we measure growth. As mentioned earlier, this is just kind of a breakdown of spending as far as it goes in an economy. So, we're looking again at total production, who can spend in an economy. Well, it's consumers, it's businesses, it's governments, and we can spend on exporting things to other countries and importing things to other countries. There's lots of cool graphics you can look at and breakdowns. Check out Visual Capitalist. They've got some really good stuff if you're interested more in breakdowns of GDP by country. This is a really good analogy. So if we look at GDP every given year, that's not the full picture. Why do doctors keep charts of what you've had or measured in the past? Why would a haircut company, Great Clips maybe, keep track of what your last haircut was? Well, they want to know the change and or what you've done in the past, and the change matters most. It's the change in your weight that matters most. So we've heard this analogy before: walk to school uphill both ways through the snow. Well, do we really know if life was worse off before? Do we really know if our GDP is much better now than it was before compared to how tough it was in the past? Well, we've got to understand the change. Look at this scenario. Oversimplified. If apples are the only thing being produced, 10 apples at $1 each, our GDP is 10. 10 apples at 125 each, our GDP is $12.50. Does that mean we're better? GDP is better, but it means we have 125% inflation is what that means, which we'll learn at healthy levels 1 to 2. So no, we're way worse off, actually. So the change in GDP matters. Let's simplify it again. Here's the top movies of all time using nominal in the moment box office receipts. Look at the years and tell me what's the problem. What do you know about prices in 2018 or 17 compared to 1977? Well, we really want to know which movie has made the most money all time. We adjust for inflation. So just like we will for GDP, we want to adjust for a change in prices. 1939 movie ticket prices between 10 cents and 13 cents. So what they did, whoever compiled this list, was they went back to and used those 10 to 13 cent prices multiplied by how many tickets were sold to see these movies. And now you get this list of adjusted for inflation or real box office receipts. So that's what we're going to focus on here. Real GDP is going to adjust for inflation so we can know if we've grown or not. Real changes are usually smaller because nominal, we have changes in prices. So this is something I would make sure I have written down or understand the difference between the two. Nominal is measured in current year prices. It does not account for inflation. So those box office receipts that you saw of top grossing movies of all time, the ones that had the most recent movie years on it, seem to be larger, but we're not accounting for changes in movie ticket prices versus real GDP, gross domestic product, will adjust for inflation, and we keep constant prices so we can know if we're growing or not, which is really important. So real GDP lets us know if we're growing faster. Lots of these graphs you're seeing have 2009 on it, the Great Recession. So we definitely were shrinking if this is zero. But we're able to adjust or show if we're actually producing more stuff based on constant prices. So as far as the world goes, why this is important is you can have the 65th largest economy that is growing at 10.2%. That's really, really healthy. That's really good for that economy. So we can't just look at nominal in the moment. Russia is the 12th largest economy. They're shrinking at 3.7%. Just looking at nominal, you'd say, hey, their country's great. They have the 12th largest. Well, we need to compare it to where they've been, and they are shrinking at 3.7%. So take some time, practice these scenarios. Nominal GDP, you should have the formula down of the number produced times the price in that year versus real GDP adjust for inflation. So you want to do the number produced times the price in a base year. So use base year prices. All right, with our real GDP practice, now we want to be able to visually show a country's performances based on that GDP. So we're going to look at something called aggregate demand and supply, which is just a fancy way of saying total. Total demand, total supply. You'll notice that these graphs look the same as demand and supply. So we have the same reminders. Keep it simple, ceteris paribus, nothing else matters. Don't trick logic. Just keep it simple with what it says. So total demand, total supply. You'll notice they're shaped the same way. We've changed the visuals on or our representations on the side. So instead of prices in micro, it's price levels. How come? Instead of a market like hamburgers, we're measuring the United States economy. So we're measuring economies as a whole. On the bottom, instead of quantities of hamburgers, we're looking at the total production levels of a country or total output. So that's called real GDP. We have an equilibrium, that's our holy grail, and we're going to want to know changes. So what makes up aggregate demand? Well, it's spenders. It's actually the formula of GDP. This formula, more consumer spending, more business spending, more government spending, more exports or less imports, shifts this entire aggregate demand curve to the right. Right is still more, left is still less. So more spending versus less spending. Why, if you have more imports, would this line shift to the left? Well, imports are made outside of your country's borders. And the definition of GDP is all final goods and services that are produced within your country's borders. So less consumer spending, less business spending, less government spending, less exports or more imports shifts this whole thing to the left. Supply is about production. So we have total production and we have short run, small changes, and long run, overall growth. So we'll come back to growth later, but let's just focus on this short run, changes in productivity, labor costs, resource costs, subsidies. Right is still more, left is still less. So shifts in aggregate demand and supply will change price levels and output now. And where all these lines meet together, this holy grail right here is called full employment. I would copy these down and then I would go through the practice trying to figure out if aggregate demand or supply increases or decreases. Those changes will change price level and output or real GDP. Until next time.